Donald Trump is now publicly indicating that he's willing to substantially reduce the 145% tariffs that he imposed on China in advance of the negotiations set to take place in Switzerland this weekend, after insisting for weeks that under no circumstances would he do so. Is Trump preparing to cave to China again? Well, before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I want to remind you of something Donald Trump said 2 days ago in the Oval Office.
In order to have substantive negotiations, you have to bring down your 145% tariffs. Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
There you have it, cut and dry. Beijing wants you to cut tariffs in advance of the negotiations. Would you be willing to do so to get them to the table? No, absolutely not. Next question. Well, reality tends to be a bit more complicated with Donald Trump. This is what he had to say earlier this morning on Truth Social. 80% tariff on China seems right, up to Scott B. Now, currently, the tariffs that Trump imposed on China are 145%. So an 80% tariff would be damn near cutting it in half. And he's saying, well, I'm willing to do it, but I'm going to leave it up to Scott B. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who will be going to Geneva, Switzerland this weekend to meet with his Chinese counterparts. So Trump is publicly indicating in advance of the meeting that he is willing to cut Chinese tariffs down to 80%. Is this before the meeting? Is he saying, hey, Scott, if you want to do this, we can do it right now to get them to the table? Is he saying this is the best that China can get after the meeting? What does this mean? Well, it seems to indicate that there may be a retreat by Trump in advance of this meeting. Let's take a look at the Associated Press here. Trump floats cutting China tariffs to 80% ahead of meeting as he looks to de-escalate trade war, the trade war he started. Donald Trump on Friday floated cutting tariffs on China from 145% to 80% ahead of a weekend meeting among top U.S. and Chinese trade officials as he looks to de-escalate the trade war between the world's two largest economies. Top U.S. officials are set to meet with a high-level Chinese delegation in Switzerland in the first major talks between the nations since Trump sparked a trade war with his stiff tariffs on Chinese imports. That's what he said. He read the tweet that we just read to you, or the Truth Social. Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer will meet Chinese Vice Premier in Geneva in the most senior known conversations between the two countries in months, according to announcements this week by the Trump administration and the Chinese Commerce Ministry. It comes amid growing U.S. market worry over the impact of the tariffs on the prices and supply of consumer goods. No country has been hit harder by Trump's trade war than China, the world's biggest exporter and second largest economy. When Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs on April 2nd, China retaliated with tariffs of its own, a move that Trump viewed as demonstrating a lack of respect. The tariffs on each other's goods have been mounting since then, with U.S. tariffs against China now at 145% and China tariffs on the U.S. at 125%. The U.S. tariff includes a 25% rate tied to Trump's claim that Beijing has failed to stem the flow of chemicals used to manufacture fentanyl, and this portion of the tariffs is unlikely to be brought up in this weekend's talks. While an 80% tariff level on Chinese goods would represent a significant reduction from the current 145%, it would still be an extremely high import duty that could create supply chain problems and push up prices, which is why I don't know what this means in terms of an 80% tariff. Are you saying, again, in advance to try to, because it's still an extremely high tariff, but you're going to lower it enough to bring them to the table? That's what Beijing has insisted. Or are you indicating that this is the best they're going to get after the talks, which is probably going to make the negotiations that much harder? Like, wait a minute, we're flying all the way to Switzerland, and the best you're authorized to do for us after the talks is an 80% tariff? Seems to me that Trump is signaling that he is prepared to cut the tariffs before the talks from 145 to 80%, and then perhaps potentially lower it further still if the negotiations go well. This seems to be a major retreat. I digress. And even with the reduction, the tariff rate would still be higher than the combined 74% rate on China that Trump announced at his April 2nd Liberation Day event. For China, experts say Beijing would insist that any agreement from the U.S. side would be credible and implemented, not just talked about, implemented. Trump had previously said he wouldn't lower the tariffs against China to hold substantive talks, but he showed signs of softening during an Oval Office appearance on Thursday when he said he could lower the 145% rate charge on Chinese goods if the weekend talks go well. So previously said, no, I'm not going to cut them in advance of the meeting. Now he's indicating, he indicated yesterday, I should say, that if the meeting goes well, I will cut them. Now he seems to be indicating he'll cut them in advance. What the hell does this mean? It seems like a retreat. The president's team has acknowledged that the 145% tariff was not sustainable, as taxes at that rate were effectively an embargo on any trade between the two countries. But it remains unclear how Trump can reconcile the contradictions in his stated goals. He wants large amounts of tariff revenues to offset his income tax cuts, but he also wants deals to increase market access for U.S. goods that would likely require lower tariffs. His aides have said he wants to isolate China, yet his tariffs on other trade partners make it difficult to create a durable alliance on trade. Trump's social media post was another sign that Trump has essentially been publicly negotiating with himself on tariffs. He started, paused, tweaked, and then threatened more import taxes, constantly reversing himself while balancing his promises to address inflation with his claims that tariffs can tilt the global economy in America's favor. So yeah, this sure seems like Trump at least gesturing towards the white flag. Like he's reached for the flag and he's like, well, I'm going to let Bessent wave it. That way he can try to save face. Well, listen, kind of like what he's been doing lately when he's being challenged on his legal defeats. Well, I don't get involved now. I leave that to my lawyers. So if Scott Bessent were to say, oh, hell yeah, I do want to cut the tariff rate on China from 145% to 80% to bring Beijing to the table to have more substantive talks to show them that we are willing to be reasonable. If Trump is confronted by that, he'll say, well, that wasn't my call. I left it up to Scott. I'd be totally fine with keeping it 145%, 155%, really. He's trying to have his cake and eat it too. I think on some level he's recognized that he's fucked up spectacularly, and he's trying to retreat while simultaneously saving face on the world stage. And I don't think it's going to work. But again, who knows with Trump? This could change in the next 45 minutes. It could change. And he could say or do something that will totally scuttle Bessent's negotiations with his Chinese counterparts in Switzerland this weekend. There's no telling what could happen. You just don't know it with Trump. And this is the thing. So many Trump supporters and apologists will say, this is the madman theory in work. This is the brilliance of Trump. This is art of the deal. But the fact of the matter is that no matter where you are in the market demands consistency and predictability. Conservative and liberal economists agree on this. Everybody from MSNBC to the Wall Street Journal, everybody in between say, listen, no matter what your policy is, there has to be a degree of predictability so capital investment can flow accordingly, so people can plan. You can't exactly plan if you're dealing with a wild card who happens to be the most powerful man on earth, and that is a major reason for the market volatility that Trump has experienced since he's been in office. It's not just that his tariff policies are terrible. They are, objectively. It's that he's taking a bad policy, an inherently bad policy, sweeping global tariffs, and he's implementing them in the most slapdash, haphazard, inconsistent way. So he's taking a bad situation, creating a bad situation, and then making it worse. And the other thing I want you to consider, Trump tried to hype up his UK deal yesterday. Now, as we discussed, it's kind of bullshit, right? Number one, he promised 90 deals in 90 days, not 90 frameworks of deals in 90 days. 90 deals in 90 days, signed, sealed, delivered. He's failing so far. He's lost a third of his time. We're past May 2nd, right? So he's shredded like a third of his time. And the best we've gotten so far is the architecture for a framework of a future deal with the United Kingdom, with whom we have a special relationship, but they're only our 11th biggest trading partner. We've been pretty much tapped out, as economists have noted, like Paul Krugman, for example, that U.S. penetration into UK markets it's been fairly open for us to begin with, number one. And number two, as J.P. Morgan has noted, this is a relatively minor deal. This is not a major game changer in any respect for either Britain or the United States. So Trump is hyping this up, this relatively minor thing that didn't need a trade war to bring the United Kingdom to the table in the first place. But think about it from Trump's perspective, or MAGA's. If this really is a big deal and demonstration that Trump really has the world by the balls and he's the one who calls the shots and we don't have to make a deal with them, they have to make a deal with us, why is he in advance of this meeting with Beijing publicly announcing that he's prepared to do the thing he's publicly insisted he won't do, which is reduce the tariffs ahead of the meeting? Like, if what he said about the UK deal was true, you would think he would be even more emboldened to not give concessions, because he can say, I brought the UK, I brought the United Kingdom to its knees without making concessions, and we have a trade surplus with them. And that's the other thing. Remember, Trump said, well, we got to get rid of these trade deficits because he views trade deficits as inherent losses, which is stupid. But we didn't even have a trade deficit with the United Kingdom. We had a trade surplus. None of it makes any sense. It really seems like on some level, he's like, oh, I screwed up. How do I get out of this in a way where I can save face? Because it really is, at the end of the day, all about his ego. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to thread that needle. And Democrats need to do everything in their power to make it impossible for him to do so, politically speaking. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.